District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Welcome to a special Friday episode of District of Conservation. Listeners are familiar with my guest today, Cam Edwards. He's a longtime fixture in Virginia and Second Amendment firearms politics, and he considers himself an influencer. He's told he's an influencer. I'm amazed you're not embracing the influencer.
That on me.
You're not flashing any products, no scantily clad clothing. So you're okay, Cam. But you're a good influencer. But it's so good to have you back on the show to talk about what's happening. And I think what's top of mind for listeners in and outside of Virginia is this shift from Youngkin kind of being this wall against gun control, former Governor Youngkin now, to newly sworn in Governor Abigail Spanberger and the Democrat trifecta, or I would say a Second Amendment trifecta that they have in Richmond, because Spanberger had campaigned that she would enact a lot of very aggressive gun control measures. I remember seeing those clips early in her campaign, right before she won, and I wouldn't be surprised if she wouldn't deviate too much unless there was some really serious big blowback to some of her actions. But we even see, in my opinion, the General Assembly even want to take it a step further than her with some of the bills that they're proposing. So you're still an editor at Bearing Arms. Why are you keeping close tabs on Virginia? And then we're going to go into, of course, kind of some of the bills that have been heard in committees.
Sure. For a couple of reasons, honestly. I mean, Virginia, I think, is ground zero for the gun control debate at the state level this session. Out in New Mexico, there's a bill that would ban the vast majority of semi-automatic rifles, as well as some semi-automatic pistols. But Virginia is the place where we're just seeing this onslaught of anti-gun legislation from the very beginning of the session. So, I think you have to report on it because this is where a lot of the action is happening. But also, I live in Virginia. And so, there may be some personal bias creeping into my coverage of Bearing Arms because I will be impacted by a lot of the bills that are already on the move, bills that have been introduced that have not yet had a hearing. These are bills that touch on every aspect of gun ownership, and they do so in a very negative way.
I think you, myself, and our countless friends and lots of people we've interacted with across the years, and I think very fondly of the lobby day of 2020 from a while ago, very interesting time when we were able to have a lot of pushback. And I'm worried that some of these bills would make you, myself, and many others criminals. So that's why I'm very happy to chat about this with you. But Cam, could you speak to some of the bills that have been heard, some of the egregious legislation items that are being considered right now? Because a lot of these measures, as we know, and I know this is preaching to the choir, and maybe this is, kind of not a swan song, but kind of falling on deaf ears to people. Everyone probably has predetermined conclusions about, some of these issues. Maybe they don't care. They don't think it impacts them. Maybe they just like having a pistol. Maybe they don't care about having an AR-15. Speak more broadly to why every gun owner should care about these kind of incremental bans. And then we'll go into some of these bills in particular.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so let's start with the differences between the House version and the Senate version of their gun and magazine ban. The Senate version, which is SB 749, as it's currently written, bans the possession of magazines that can hold more than 10 rounds. So if you own a magazine that's 17 round that comes standard with your Glock, if the Senate bill becomes law, then as of July the 1st, unless you permanently modify that magazine so it can only accept 10 rounds, you remove that magazine from the state, you hand it over to the state police or local law enforcement, you are in violation of the law. It is a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by 12 months in jail and or a $2,500 fine. The House version, which was heard earlier this week, has that grandfather clause for existing owners. And I think there's some debate and discussion about which version is going to be the one that the Democrats end up getting behind. And it may very well be the House version, right? That may be their attempt to be moderate on this issue, that, okay, we're not going to criminalize you right away. But they've already signaled that this is where they're going. And we've seen this in other states like California, right? California back in the late 80s passed a magazine ban. It had the grandfather clause. And then I think it was probably 6 years ago, they just suddenly yeeted that grandfather clause out of the legislation, and people who had owned these magazines for decades were told, you've got to get rid of them or else you are a criminal. So this is one reason why, even if you don't own an AR-15, if you own a handgun for self-defense, there's a very good chance that you own a magazine that the Democrats don't want you to have. We're also looking at bills. Now, this bill has not had a hearing yet, but an 11% excise tax on the sale of all firearms and ammunition. So let's say you've bought your gun, you don't plan on buying anymore. Well, if you go to the range on a regular basis, it's going to become more expensive for you to train. If you've been thinking about buying a gun, but you do not yet have a firearm, or maybe you're just looking for your next gun, a permit to purchase bill is moving in both the House and the Senate. This would require people to undergo training. According to the Virginia Shooting Sports Association, training that's actually more onerous than what it takes to get a concealed carry license right now. So it would require, I think the House version would require, and the Senate version would require live fire. So you'd have to go to a range. You would have to, take a test. And if you don't own a gun, this is really weird. Under the provisions of this permit to purchase bill, it also applies to rentals of firearms, transfers of firearms. So I don't know how somebody could train and take that test without, borrowing a gun from somebody, renting a gun from a range. It's a catch-22. The Virginia State Police would be allowed to charge as much as they claim it takes to process an application. We've seen this language in California, and you've got places like Santa Clara County where it costs more than $1,000 to apply for a concealed carry permit. I don't think it would be that high in Virginia, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a couple $100s to apply for a permit to purchase. And then, in addition to that, we've also got bills that would put a $500 tax on suppressors. You've got bills that would create a Virginia Center for Gun Violence Prevention, which is, as far as I'm concerned, just a jobs program for gun control activists in the state of Virginia. People who've been, lobbying and testifying against our rights would suddenly be employed by the state to go after our rights. So, even from a taxpayer perspective, I think there are reasons to be concerned. But if you care about your Second Amendment rights, then yeah, you need to be paying attention to what's going on here because, as I said, this is going to impact hunters. This is going to impact people who are collectors. This is going to impact people who, own firearms for competition or for self-defense. Whatever lawful purpose you own a firearm, you're going to be impacted by these bills.
Hi, it's Charlie McAvoy from the Boston Bruins.
Charlie McAvoy wins it in overtime.
Watch as we take on the Tampa Bay Lightning in the 2026 NHL Stadium Series in Tampa. Catch all the action on Sunday, February 1st on ESPN. Visit nhl.com/stadium series for tickets and more information. That's nhl.com/stadium series. See you February 1st. The NHL Stadium Series is coming to the Sunshine State.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
A lot of red flags stick out to me as you're talking about this, Cam. Of course, the erosion of our rights. Secondly, in my opinion, millions of dollars that come through Pittman-Robertson anytime you purchase a firearm, and then this misinterpreting of Pittman-Robertson to levy another 11% tax. Also, do you really, I don't know if you've spoken to any representatives of the Virginia State Police. Unless they are fully on board with this agenda, I don't see how many of them enforce this. Like what's their sentiment? Like, are they eager to enforce this? Are they opposed to a lot of these proposals? Like, what's the sentiment you've heard from some of the law enforcement?
I am sure that individual officers, most of them are not eager to enforce this. I don't know that the VSP has taken an official policy on any of these bills. I don't know that they will take an official policy. But yeah, they're going to be the clearinghouse for a lot of these things, right? I mean, the permit to purchase system, for example, would be administered by the Virginia State Police. That was originally, by the way, supposed to have an effective date of July 1st this year. I think the VSP did ask for a delay to 2028 to allow them to develop a system. But, they didn't say, hey, we don't want to do this. This is unconstitutional. So I think where you're going to see the objections from law enforcement is going to come in at the county sheriff level. 6 years ago, you referenced 2020. We had over 100 counties in Virginia declare themselves to be Second Amendment sanctuaries. And you had county sheriffs vow that any law that violated the Second Amendment was not going to be enforced in their county. We're starting to see some county supervisors hold votes on reaffirming that stance. There have been a couple of county sheriffs who've spoken up and basically said, yeah, I'm not going to be enforcing these laws. But this is a trickle compared to the flood that we saw 6 years ago. And I hope that the number of counties grows by leaps and bounds here as more people become aware of the threats that really exist.
I'm not sure if we'll see like near universal support as we did 6 years ago, because some of those counties that were pro Second Amendment have shifted because of just the dynamics of Virginia has changed as people have left and certain other voters have moved in, more suburbanite anti-gun voters, unfortunately. But it would be nice to see like 80 counties or close to 90 counties in support of that again, because like we're, as a Commonwealth, we are generally a lot safer compared to DC. If we're thinking of our region in the Mid-Atlantic, we are much safer than Maryland, much safer than DC. And my understanding and my reading into this, having been involved in reporting this for nearly a decade, much like you, Cam, I don't see how this is going to save one life. And it's not to be callous or mean, but I just have not seen any evidence that this would prevent a crime involving mishandling and misusing of firearms. In fact, if listeners, and you remember very clearly, if listeners recall, and I know you've reported on this, I remember when Northam was governor towards the tail end of his term, and there was a Democrat trifecta, but a slight majority, not as robust as we're seeing now with this new General Assembly. I remember there was a case out of Richmond where someone who had committed, and all the while they were proposing, I have to go back to this, I don't want to omit this from the discussion. While they're proposing gun control, this goes back to the kind of leniency they have towards criminals that we saw under Northam. We also see proposals to downgrade murder, downgrade rape, while they're supercharging all these gun control bills. So how are we going to be safer if they're downgrading egregious crimes while making those of us who are law-abiding criminals?
It's a great question. And, my answer is that when it comes to these gun control bills, public safety is the argument, but public safety is not really the goal here, right? The goal, I think, is to reduce legal gun ownership. And I think some Democrats have been pretty open about that. Certainly, Senator Saddam Salim, who's the author of the Senate Gun and Magazine ban, said that his goal is to, have a few of these firearms around, right? Because they don't belong on the streets. They're battlefield weapons of war. But, the fundamental premise of the gun control movement is that more guns makes people less safe. So it's not just about reducing crime. If it was, as you say, Virginia is safer than Maryland. It's safer than the District of Columbia. We have very low crime rates. They continue to drop across most of the state. You've got a couple of problem areas like Richmond and Petersburg, where, the crime is unacceptably high. But as you say, I don't think that new gun control laws are going to change that, right? I mean, you look at Maryland, for example, from 2015 to, I believe it was 2023, Baltimore, Maryland had over 300 homicides each and every year. The numbers start going down in 2023, the year after the states may issue carry laws are thrown out by the Supreme Court. All of a sudden, now you've got this, eightfold increase in the number of people across Maryland, including Baltimore, who are lawfully carrying firearms. Crime starts to go down. And I'm not saying it's because solely of that. I also think that there were policing strategies that were put in place that were very effective, targeted deterrence. You're looking at the small number of individuals who are committing an outsized portion of violent crime. Well, we're already doing that in Virginia. Jason Miyares, the now former Attorney General, put in place a program called Ceasefire. And this is a program that, again, looks at the worst of the worst offenders and says, essentially, you're going to stop shooting, and we're going to help you turn your life around if you let us, and we're going to throw you behind bars and toss away the key if you don't. And so this program was put in place in cities like Roanoke, in Petersburg, in Richmond, had stakeholders from law enforcement to community officials. It's been very successful. That's how we reduce crime, right? We go after the people who are actually committing crime. Well, what are Democrats doing right now? They're going after people who own guns. So the goal to me must be to reduce the number of legal gun owners.
That seems to be the case anywhere this has been tried. And I want to ask you about legal challenges, because a lot of people from outside of Virginia have telegraphed to me, like, aren't you guys going to file lawsuits? Like, can't some of you who own guns and who are concealed carry holders, aren't you guys going to sign on as plaintiffs? And lawsuits are going to be great to challenge these, especially if they make through and they're finalized. Although if we do see a lot of pushback, maybe some of these bills will be watered down, but it's still unacceptable to us to see any semblance of this clear the General Assembly and make it to Governor Spanberger's desk. So what would legal challenges look like, Cam? Because yes, I think I think certain higher courts. I'm not sure about all local courts in Virginia. We have the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has a reputation of being similar to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Can the Supreme Court weigh in? Is the Department of Justice going to weigh in? Like, what would happen, hypothetically speaking, Cam, if legal challenges were to ensue following the enactment, hypothetically speaking, if these were to clear and make the governor's desk?
Yeah. I suspect that, you talk about the Fourth Circuit. I mean, the Fourth Circuit has upheld Maryland's ban on so-called assault weapons. They said that, AR-15s are like machine guns, that they're not protected by the Second Amendment. They upheld Maryland's permit to purchase law by saying, essentially, well, if you can have a concealed permit to carry, then you should be able to have a permit to keep, too, without violating the Constitution. So, that's going to be a challenge. Now, there's the possibility of President Trump, appointing judges to the Fourth Circuit, maybe flipping that court to a more conservative point of view. But I suspect that we'll see a lot of state-level challenges as well, because Virginia does have a right to keep bear arms enshrined in its state constitution. GOA, Governors of America, Virginia Citizens Defense League, challenged the state's universal background check law. And a circuit court judge actually agreed with them and said, yeah, this law is unconstitutional because it infringes on the rights of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to purchase handguns. If you go to a background check at a gun shop, an 18, 19, 20-year-old is not going to be approved to have that handgun transferred to them, because under federal law they can't buy one. But under Virginia state law, they can possess one, at least as of right now. So, I think that there's the possibility of a dual track system, right? We'll have some lawsuits filed in federal court, some lawsuits filed in a circuit court, and ultimately those will be appealed up to the state Supreme Court, which as of right now has a reputation for being pretty small c conservative, right? Which I think would hopefully benefit us going forward. As for the Supreme Court, my hope is that the Supreme Court takes a hardware case before any of these Gunner magazine bans go into effect. They've got several cases that are pending in conference right now. Challenge to California's magazine ban that I mentioned earlier, as well as the magazine ban in Washington State. Challenge to Cook County, Illinois' ban on so-called assault weapons. We're also waiting on the Third Circuit to issue its opinion in a challenge to New Jersey's Gunner magazine ban. And there's a lot of anticipation that the Third Circuit is actually going to rule against New Jersey, which would create a circuit court split. And, I think put more pressure on the Supreme Court to take up one of these cases sooner rather than later. I also wonder, Gabby, we do know that some justices live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, some of the more conservative members of the court. So it's entirely possible that they're going to be directly impacted, just like you and I are, by some of these laws. And maybe that provides a little nudge for the Supreme Court to take one of these cases sooner rather than later. So we are going to see lawsuits. There's going to be no shortage of plaintiffs. I'm sure, I'd be happy to get involved. You'd probably be happy to get involved. And a lot of Virginia gun owners will be happy to get involved. What I would say is, even if your name's not on the lawsuit, support the lawsuit, because these things are expensive. And, to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, we're talking about, $1 million. And that's not attorneys getting rich off of this. That involves, reasonable attorneys' fees. It involves the cost that comes with filing, printing briefs. There's just a lot of administrative costs that go in with a lawsuit. Alan Beck, who represented the plaintiffs in the Wolford versus Lopez challenge, which the Supreme Court heard a couple weeks ago, he had to, basically a fundraise to come up with the money to put the brief together, because I think it was like $22,000 to file this brief in the manner that the court requires. So, support groups like VCDL, the Virginia Shooting Sports Association, support the national 2A groups that we know are taking an interest. And, hope that the DOJ, and encourage the DOJ Civil Rights Division and Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon to weigh in on the side of Virginia gun owners as well. I suspect that's going to happen. My biggest concern is that lawsuits take time. And, if Democrats take back the White House in 2028, then by early 2029, the DOJ Civil Rights Division is not going to be defending the Second Amendment anymore.
Mm-mm.
And, so we need to work quickly on some of these things. And, if they delay the permit to purchase measure until July 1st, 2028, we're really not going to be able to challenge that until the law takes effect, or at least is, imminent. And so, that really makes it less likely that, again, if Democrats take over, that the DOJ could play a major role in that case. Certainly when it comes to things like, the ban on magazines and so-called assault weapons, I think that they could be. We'll see what happens again with the increased taxes for gun owners. But there's also legislation we haven't really talked about, but there's legislation that's designed to do an end run around the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act.
Yes,
Allow
PLACA.
gun makers, gun sellers, gun distributors to be sold for the actions of criminals based on their marketing tactics, based on these vague and undefined, reasonable standards for control. We've seen several states, implement similar laws. And I'm really concerned again that, the Democrats are going to put that law in place. It's going to become increasingly untenable for, especially smaller gun stores across the Commonwealth to remain in business.
And this is interesting because we're seeing, we don't have to wade into this, of course, but nationally, we're seeing the conversation about Second Amendment take hold nationally over the tragic shooting in Minnesota. And a lot of people have different opinions about that. And it was very tragic that the individual lost their life there. And we've talked about this for years, Cam, that partisan kind of opinions about guns is kind of morphing and shaping. You're seeing more independent people. You're seeing even Democrats, center-left people starting to buy firearms. I would think a lot of center-left people here in the Commonwealth of Virginia would be very nervous about some of these proposals. And I hope that they do speak out, not just have those of us who might lean conservative or libertarian, but this is supposed to be a right that's enjoyed by everyone, supported by everyone. And I have yet to see some of the center-left folks speak out against this, and I hope that they do. Briefly, Cam, as we round out our conversation, so Lobby Day has come and gone. That's usually one of the biggest efforts Virginia gun owners can do and attend to make your voice heard, to communicate your opposition to potential bills or pre-filed bills now that these are bills moving through the General Assembly. There are other ways for people, especially citizens and gun owners in this state, to weigh in and express their dismay. What can be done before the lawsuits are filed? Would you encourage people to write letters to the editor, maybe make social media videos, encourage people to testify against these items that are currently being heard in Richmond? What can people do in the interim before the lawsuits and the challenges take place?
Yeah, all of the above. And, particularly if you are represented by a Democrat, they need to hear from you, right? There was a State of the Commonwealth poll that came out earlier this week showing 50% of Virginians support more restrictive gun laws, which means 50% don't, right? So this is really a 50-50 issue. And that's before, a lot of these details really came out. We've got, I think, we've got the opportunity to move the needle, and particularly among, those center-left folks that you were talking about. So yeah, even if you're, represented by a Democrat, they need to be hearing from you. And yes, please educate your friends, your family, your coworkers about what this means for lawful Virginia gun owners across the state. I would say also, though, reach out to your county supervisor, reach out to your county sheriff, reach out to your Commonwealth's attorney, and urge them to take a stand and to say that, enforcing these possessory laws that turn lawful gun owners into criminals, not going to be a priority for their office, that they're going to focus on, violent criminals, people who are actually doing damage to society instead of people who are exercising a constitutional right. If we get lucky, maybe Abigail Spanberger, maybe, as you say, maybe some of these bills get watered down. Maybe Abigail Spanberger vetoes a couple of them because, you're a one-term governor in Virginia, right? You get 4 years, that's it. So she's looking at her next political campaign.
That's the open secret.
Senator,
we know that.
Yeah. Vice president, right? Whether it's 2028 for the White House, how she governs, I think matters to her. So, I think that there is a slim possibility that if there is overwhelming opposition to some of these bills, that maybe she takes a pass, or on at least, maybe a couple of the minor things. Like, look, I think she's going to sign a gun and magazine ban bill. I don't think there's any way she vetoes that. But maybe on, let's say, an 11% excise tax on firearms and ammunition, maybe that $500 tax on suppressors if it gets to her desk. Something like that, I could see her strategically vetoing in order to appear moderate. So, right now the pressure needs to be on our lawmakers and our local officials. And when these bills start moving to the governor, then I think we need to start applying pressure there as well.